I was a planner. In 5 years, I'm going to hit this. In 10 years, it's going to look like that. This is how it's all going to play out. And what I've learned, being in this industry for almost 20 years, is that
Welcome to the Next Level Journalist, where you will hear from some of the best journalists in the business or who have been there, done that, and willing to share with you what they've learned so you can get better, faster.
My guest today is a host and producer at PBS Utah, Liz Adeola. Thank you so much for making time for this today and seeing you again.
absolutely, it's good to catch up. It's been a while.
A little more than a decade, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That's pretty crazy. So we've got lots to catch up on. But in a Cliff Notes version, if you can, Liz, give us your TV career journey. When you got interested in TV and the stops that you made along the way. And I know you've certainly had your trials and successes. Otherwise, you wouldn't be out there doing what you're doing. And I'm so excited for what you're about to share there. But give us an idea of what your TV journey has been like.
Oh man, a Cliff Notes version. I always try to keep it really, really
Well,
tight.
when I
But
say Cliff Notes, it can be 5-10 minutes. We'll see where this goes.
okay. So I think I got interested in TV just as a kid. Our family would gather to watch crazy shows like 60 Minutes and the news, and I really enjoyed the storytelling aspect of it. My grandma was a great storyteller, and I would, technically to this day, it would be like I was interviewing her, just, regaling in her all of her stories. And I knew as a kid that I really loved history, and I loved reading, and I loved English. And I enjoyed watching the news a lot to the point, or to the extent where I would turn on the closed captioning as a kid and read the closed captioning like I was the anchor reading the
Wow.
different stories. So it just kind of fell into place. And then I think in seventh or eighth grade, I saw Channel One News during my homeroom period. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? Kids are doing this? Like, I could be doing this too. And I think that really, they had that contest where you could put together a reel or a little demo and send it to them, and try to get on the show for one day. And I did that, and I was just like, this is what I want to do. It's being able to help tell history as it happens. And so that really excited me about going down this route. And I think in high school, I was also able to job shadow a news reporter. And she told me, like, never get in this business. Don't ever get in this business.
Wow.
I think she was having a rough day, which I understand now. But at the
Yeah.
time, I was just like, what is she talking about? This is so cool. You get to do something different every day. You're not wearing a uniform to work, and you have the freedom just to be out and not sitting in an office all the time. And so that just really excited me, being able to meet new people, getting able to go to different exciting places. And so that just really drew me to wanting to go down the route of being a television news reporter. And I will share what that journey was like as quickly as possible. I went to the Walter Cronkite School of Broadcast Journalism at Arizona State University. Did not get a job right out of school. It was a struggle. Like, I had a job, but it was not the job I wanted. I worked in a call center and was applying for jobs like every other day as soon as I was able to, within that rank, because that was with General Electric, and at the time General Electric owned NBC. So I was like, okay, like, I can work this out, and maybe this can be, in the meantime, while I'm also applying to these other jobs. But I went to school back in the time where people were submitting tapes, and I had like set a goal. Okay, I'm going to send out 10 tapes every week and go to the post office every week and send out 10 tapes. And that's what I was doing for like a year and a half.
Wow.
And it stretched out for a long time because I had a promise from a news director who was like, as soon as I get an opening, like, you're going to be my next hire. You're going to be the one that I hired. And then some crazy stuff happened where they lost a member of the team. The news director got a job in Vegas and left to go back to an on air career, unbeknownst to me, uncommunicated to me. So I'm still like thinking, like, okay, maybe he's just busy. Why isn't he responding to my emails? And then I finally call and they're like, oh, he doesn't work here anymore. And I had to restart the process all over again. So after I went through all of that, I started looking at positions behind the scenes and got hired on as an overnight associate producer in Reno, Nevada, and was given a couple of promises while I worked there because they knew I wanted to be on air. And they were like, well, I see you have some weather on your reel. Maybe we can use you as a fill-in weather person, and maybe you can do the weather sometimes on the weekends. That was the promise. And about 4 months passed, 6 months passed, and that never happened. To the point where the news director said in front of everyone when an opening came up for a meteorologist, we're not just going to throw anyone on the air. We want someone who's certified. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I see where your head is at. You were never going to use me as a fill-in person. But something within me said, keep applying for other positions. And I did. Like, even on my very first day working there, I had applied for the job that led me to KOSA in Odessa. And it took a while for that to happen while I was working there. So I was in Reno for about, I want to say like 6 or 7 months. And then I went to Odessa, and that opportunity came about because someone else like that they had chosen, they weren't able to hire for some reason that I was never told. And so they turned to me instead. And I went there through the Minorities in Broadcast Training Program, which is a program that helps place minorities in like on air. It gives them it gives us the opportunity to get the experience working on air, build up our reel, do the actual work as though we are reporting and working at the station. But the pay is very, very low, but we're not under contract. So as soon as I get another opportunity that's under contract, I was able to go. And so at KOSA, CBS 7, I was there for, say, 9 or 10 months, and, steadily building up that reel, working like 7 days a week, volunteering to work on the weekends just to eat. It was a lot. And it was at a point where Jose was like, okay, Liz, I know I said work as much as you need to survive, but it's too much. Like, this is kind of illegal. You have to work. And so after about 10 months there, he did want me to stay, but I got an opportunity where I wasn't going to be a full MMJ in Decatur, Illinois. And in Decatur, I was given like a photographer to work with, which I was like, oh yeah, like that seems like a step up to me. And it was a bigger market in number, but technically the way the Springfield, Champaign, Decatur market is set up, it was almost like it was a smaller market because it's like a tri-city area.
Okay.
Where each of the stations are located in different cities, and the cities are anywhere from an hour to maybe like 45 minutes to an hour apart. So, and there's nothing but like tumbleweeds in between. Not tumbleweeds, but you know what I mean? Like just grass in between each city. So those drives are long. And so each city is like, okay, you're at the NBC station. The NBC station is our station for our city. Mm-hmm. And the stations at that time would really focus on content and telling stories in those cities. So it was almost like it was a smaller market. And I also felt like I went back a little bit because we were editing tape to tape. And at CBS 7, like everything was, like we didn't have tape. It was kind of cutting edge for that time. And I didn't really know it or get that. And that's how it was in Reno as well, because they had just switched to HD. And this was like at the beginning of everything. I'm going to age myself, but this was like in 2007, I want to say, in Reno. And in a small market, it was market 110, and they were presenting the newscast in HD. And so then I go to CBS 7. We still have the nonlinear editing, which was really, really cool. but it wasn't in HD. And then I go to the station in Decatur where it's tape to tape, and I'm looking at it, and it looks like news from the 1990s. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, what did I do? So I got there, and it was built a lot of friendships. Um, that was like the first time that I worked in a situation where a lot of people started getting laid off. So when my 2-year contract came up, like there were all kinds of crazy cuts in the industry and people were getting laid off left and right. And I was offered a chance to anchor at that station. So I stayed for another 2 years and was the weekend anchor slash reporter, and was producing those weekend newscasts and doing the web and all of that stuff. And I think my boss let me stay there a little bit longer than my contract without signing another contract, which I'm so grateful for that. Because then I was led to Columbus, Ohio, where I was they called them digital journalists at that time, DJs, but it was basically the same thing as a multimedia journalist. But oh my gosh, it was I loved it there because as a multimedia journalist, I was given my own gear, a take-home vehicle, and I it was the first time I worked in a market in a place where I was able to a lot of times just go from home straight to the story, turn the story in the field, send it back by file transfer protocol we were doing at that time, and then go back home, call it a day, send my stories for the next day, and then start all over again. And I just loved like the freedom of that and being able to do that. And I was in Columbus for 3 years before going to Indianapolis, where I was offered an opportunity once again to anchor more often, and was in Indianapolis for 2 years before coming here to Utah, where uh, total change. It was like leaving the news and not. In Indianapolis, there was a lot of crime. I was covering a lot of crime, and it felt like almost to the level of I just was covering a lot of crime every day, it seemed like, and I'm not gonna lie, I was getting burnt out and was just like, I like to smile. I need a balance of
Yeah.
telling, those uplifting, fun stories and telling what's really happening in society. And it felt like I just wasn't getting that balance in Indianapolis. So the hardest thing I ever did in my life, I didn't have a contract. Um, for another place to go to. My mom would always say, don't ever leave a job without having another job lined up. But this time, when they offered me, hey, do you want to stay here in Indianapolis? And the offer wasn't, it was, it was just like, you can stay here, do the same thing that you've been doing. We know you're great at filling in on the anchor desk, and we'll let you fill in more Monday through Friday. And I'm like, but I can do the job, but you don't want to pay for it. You just want me to fill in. I don't know about that. And I felt almost like I was a coroner, like the amount of crime I was covering and doors I was knocking on, trying to get people to talk about losing their loved ones. It just, it was not for me. And so I took a step back, and it took a long time to get to where I am right now, a lot longer than I thought. I kind of had a promise of a position at a station that I had been eyeing for years, but that fell through. I was ghosted. Sorry about that. That's my Teams
You're fine.
popping up, and I do not know how to silence that. But it it took a long time. I stepped away without another job lined up, and it was like 6 or 7 months of just stepping back, applying, and then I would go on some interviews and I'd be like, this feels like the same situation that I just left. Like, why would I why would I take this leap of faith and then go back to the same thing that I just ran away from, or that I just left? Like, that makes no sense. So I kept applying, and then in the meantime I went back to graduate school. I always wanted to get a master's degree. So went back to graduate school, and it felt like when I started graduate school, like more interviews started coming. And I'm like, great. So now I'm doing school and flying around to these different interviews. But came across the job here at PBS Utah. I actually technically started my career working for PBS while I was in college. I worked in master control for the PBS station that's on the campus of Arizona State University, which covers like the Phoenix area. So it was just almost like a homecoming, and they were launching this show called This Is Utah, where it's a feature show. You get to travel the state and interview people about art, history. Um, what else do we do? Art, history, like adventure things like rock climbing and just all kinds of fun stuff. And so that's where I am right now. And
That
that
is
wasn't short at all. I'm sorry. It was, it was so long, but it's
no.
quite a journey.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I didn't know the half of it. I mean, I knew most of it, and that's so cool to hear. Like some of the first things that come to mind is perseverance. Literally the grind that you went through to break through. I think that's anyone who sees this, who's trying to get their first opportunity, can probably relate to, especially in this season that we're going through. So, if you could speak to them, that population who's going after that first job, what would you say to them about trying to break through? What they can do to try to separate themselves, and advice and encouragement, whatever you think they should know.
Sometimes you have to throw the plans that you had out the window. Because I was wondering if I have it in my office. I had this book that was called the Resume Tape Book that I got before I graduated from college. And it was just packed full of like stories of how many times people had to apply for their first job and how I got my first job. And it had a lot of news directors in their feature talking about like what they're looking for in candidates and what makes them eject a tape and things like that. And so I had all of these plans laid out like, okay, these are the markets I want to go to. Um, these are the jobs. This is the salary I want. Like I was a planner. In 5 years, I'm going to hit this. In 10 years, it's going to look like that. This is how it's all going to play out. And what I've learned being in this industry for almost 20 years is that a lot of times you can make plans, but you have to be willing to veer away from them. And sometimes it's about not listening to what people are saying when they're like, you don't have enough experience, don't apply to that. Apply to it anyways. Like, what's the worst that could happen? You could get an interview and it's practice for the next interview.
Right.
So it's like be willing to take a different path and also be open towards changing that plan and that plan being changed.
Yeah,
And
and it
don't
sounds like
yeah,
your plans have changed multiple, stops along the way. And I love how you walked away from the opportunity. And I say that because, the advice that your mom gave you about, don't leave a job without having a job. I was in a similar boat. I left an opportunity in West Virginia. I just knew it wasn't right for me anymore. It was a toxic place. It just wasn't right. And I was unemployed for 6 months, and it sounded like you were unemployed for a while. And fortunately, everything worked out and it landed you where you were. So, if you could talk a little bit about, just I don't know if it's going with your gut or how when to make those decisions. And obviously, you had been in the business for a while at that point in order to walk away, but to have that confidence and to do such a thing, because so many people think, oh, job opportunity, better take it, and you didn't do that every time.
a lot of prayer, a lot of faith. I kept on praying because I was just like, all right, like, give me a sign. Am I supposed to stay here? Should I leave? Should I sign this contract? What should I tell my news director? And it was almost like, come on, Liz, this is common sense. Like, I was I was covering a lot of crime, a lot of gruesome crime, and like some of the most terrible stories that I've ever covered in my career, and terrible tragedies. These happen to people, and a lot of times people would say, like, as a journalist, you have to separate yourself from that and not feel, like be compassionate, but if you're caring too much, then that's time for you to go because you can't, like separate yourself from the story and things like that. And there was no way I was going to be able to do that. And it was hard for me because I felt like this industry needs someone who's caring and compassionate enough to understand that if a mom's kid accidentally shot himself and died, she's not the enemy. She's not a criminal. She made a mistake, and this is the worst time ever in her life. So knocking on her door, leaving cards, showing up every day, like where's the humanity in that? And that was something that I was being asked to do, and that other journalists were doing, and then I was getting the brunt of that when I would show up and they'd be like, you're the fifth person who's come to my door, can I just breathe? And so there was like a disconnect of like I agree, like this isn't something that needs to be splashed everywhere, and you know I'm not trying to profit off of someone else's pain, yet that is what it feels like this industry is trying to push people to do. And I just couldn't agree with that, and just was like, it's not that I can't separate myself from the story, but it's that I see that this is feeding something toxic out into our society and being a part of the problem instead of a part of the solution.
That's awesome. I love how you put that because gosh, being in a newsroom, I can so relate. Even though I did sports, I saw what you talked about, and I didn't live, I didn't report or live in an area like Indianapolis. I mean, so good for you. That's pretty neat to hear your perspective on that, Liz. And I think this next question, I kind of know the answer to, but I'd like to hear you say it at least. But what would you credit your success to? I mean, to go from that time where you said, a year plus, year and a half of not getting that opportunity to where, yes, it took longer than you liked, but you're doing great work out there, stuff that you clearly love doing in Utah. So what would you credit that to, you think?
I thank God all the time. That's the main source that I credit it to. But I also played a lot of sports when growing up and as a kid, and I did the hurdles. And one thing in the hurdles, if you fall, if you stumble, if you embarrass yourself, like you just got to get up and keep on going. And so I think doing sports, and man, if I take it back, I was a runner. And when I was in middle school, I had a friend in a PE class, and she was always kicking butt in running the mile and wouldn't stop. And everybody else would stop and walk and get the side cramps and stuff like that. So finally, I just asked her, like, how are you able to just keep, like, I just started asking her questions. How are you able to just keep running? Like, what is it that that's happening in you that's not happening in me? Like, because I get terrible side cramps. It hurts. It feels awful. And she's just like, oh, well, when I get a side cramp, I just push in my stomach or the area where I'm getting the cramp and I blow out. Like, I blow a puff out and I'm able to just keep going. I was like, what? So then I started doing that. And it just led to like this whole thing of me falling in love with running. And um, as a runner, there's like this whole mentality when you're doing long distance of I'm not running 5 miles, I'm not running 10 miles. I just started and I still have the fuel and the ability to make it through. And so I hope I'm answering your question because this is a long ramble rant that's going on. But it's just like I was able to do that in my career, no matter how crummy or awful like it would seem like. I would be like, you're just getting started. This is not the end for you. And you're going to be able to continue on and make it. And I think just having that mentality helped out so much. And then also at the same time, so that's like my little running analogy. I also wanted to be a cheerleader and was awful and terrible at the auditions and the tryouts. And it took like three terrible auditions before I finally made it to actually being a cheerleader. And people were telling me, like, oh, why are you still doing it? This is embarrassing. You should give up. And instead of giving up, I was like, okay, let me go to the library and get a book and figure out like how to get better at doing this, this, and this, and how do people memorize the routines and memorize the cheers and stuff like that. And when I finally made it, people were like, oh, wow. And I feel like I had that same mentality in my career. People were like, oh, I thought you were going to be a reporter. You went to college and now you're just working in a call center answering the phones. Like, and I was like, no, like, this is just a stopping point. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue to apply for these jobs. And maybe it won't be that on air job that I start out with first. Maybe it'll be something behind the scenes. But even when I'm behind the scenes, I'm going to be busy building up my craft and working my way up until I get to where I want to be.
Yeah, you definitely answered the question, Liz. To answer your question earlier, I love analogies. I'm person, someone who likes an analogy, and that way you can relate it to whoever's watching, whether they want to be a cheerleader or whether they want to be a runner, whatever it may be. So I appreciate that. No, to give us a different look. But so I'm hearing perseverance, learning from your mistakes, learning from others, all these things. So again, tons of messages within those messages. So that's great. How about your skills? How do you think you developed your skills over the years, and what you would tell someone? Say, hey, do these things in order to be a great storyteller or be a great reporter, because you've done a little bit of everything. You were no stranger to picking up a camera. It sounds like from day one, really. So, and I can attest to that. So I didn't think we clarified, but if people didn't pick it up, we crossed paths in West Texas. So you had a camera back then, and so how do you develop those skills, and in whatever area you think is necessary, whether it be a a photojournalist, a reporter, anchor, whatever you feel on your heart to share.
I think I just developed the skills because I developed this, I'm not going to say tough shell, but like I was like, okay, well, in this industry and in this career, I'm going to have times where I'm embarrassing myself. And I have to be okay with it and then get up the next day and do it again and do it better and learn from that mistake that happened and just continue to rise and build upon that. And so I think, yeah, I just was willing to embarrass myself quite a lot. It got to the point when trying to get MOS, which is man on the street interviews, I was like, oh my gosh, this must be what it feels like to be rejected over and over again when you're trying to ask someone out. Because like that was like a struggle getting people to open up and talk. But I would take the feedback and I would take what I did the day before and be like, okay, well that didn't work, or I went to that location and that didn't really work. What can I do differently to make people feel more comfortable to open up? A lot of the times the excuse would be like, oh, my hair doesn't look good today, or oh no, I don't want to be on camera. Like that was always the excuse of people that didn't want to do those man on the street interviews. And so I just had to get creative in figuring out a different way to approach it in order to get people to actually do the interviews. And I think I started looking at it almost like it was a game. And I'd be like, all right, I'm going to this spot. I'm going to try to get 10 people I'm going to try to talk to 10 people and get at least 3 or 4 interviews out of those 10. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to another spot and I'm pulling aside 10 people and trying the same thing. And so I would just tackle it like that. And then as far as like doing live shots, someone said like when you're driving in your car, just pretend like you're a reporter and talk about what you see, which is what reporters are doing in live shots all the time. And just try to talk about it in a fluid manner where you're not saying or taking pauses or, and just be relaxed and do that. So a lot of times when I would be driving in my car, I would just be talking to myself in my car, but I would just be talking about what I was seeing as I was driving around. And I feel like that helped a lot with the live shots. As far as shooting, I watched stories. I watched a lot of stories, and I found people who I loved their style of shooting. And when I would see a shot, I would save the link. I would save where I saw that story and be like, I'm going to try that in a story that I shoot next time. Or I'm going to try this move in a story that I shoot the next time and get creative. And NPPA has a great YouTube page where they spotlight and highlight the best of the best quarterly, I believe, on their YouTube page. So I would just study that, and watch a lot of stories and a lot of work and find people who I really looked up to and try to do the same thing and get creative as well.
That's awesome. Tons of practical stuff someone can do right now. So that's good stuff, Liz. I'm going to leave the last one up to you. Is there anything else that you want to add or touch on? Because I do want to respect your time here. That you think that you want to share with this particular audience? People trying to break through or trying to get their next opportunity in TV journalism. Something that you haven't shared yet that you think they need to know this moving forward.
I wish I had known, because so many people were stressed about going the traditional route.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had known how much of the storytelling that I love to do, the feature stories, the uplifting stories, and like the positive stories, are done in different outlets outside of news, and they're done really, really well. Like, I didn't know before I came to this job that PBS had local programming and that they had like fun feature shows, or, like just creative shows that were different from the day to day grind of pumping out content in news. And I've been judging a lot of like news awards programs. And what I found is, in a lot of the sports categories, there's a lot of creative and just some of the most beautiful storytelling that I've ever seen. And I had the idea that sports was all about, play by play and what I see in newscasts. And so just having an open mind about, if there's something that you're passionate about, like I'm passionate about feature stories, and that became a smaller and smaller portion of the newscast. There are other places, other companies outside of news that are doing that kind of work at a high level that's getting recognition that you may not be aware of. So I think that's what I would impart upon your viewers and listeners.
Yeah, that's really good and so true, because not only is Liz doing what she loves to do, but she's been awarded along the way, Emmy Award-winning host and producer. So congratulations on all your success, Liz, and thank you so much for your time and everything you shared with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for checking out this channel. If you found this content beneficial, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone you think might find it beneficial as well, because this channel was simply started and created to serve you, to help others grow, to learn how other successful TV journalists do or did it. So take what serves you so you can get better faster and reach your next level.